Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always by my good friend, my business partner, Mr. Jason Johnston Yellen. Still has water in his mouth. You going to swallow that, or just what's going on here?
I thought we were going to be better. I thought we were going to be best.
Hashtag be best. You're drinking. Yeah, I thought you were too, but you drank water in an inopportune time.
No spit takes from me today. Down the hatch.
So, how you diddly doing?
Good. I have to tell you,
Oh,
the other night, my wife and I reached Shabbat after a long, torturous 5 days, which somehow were worse than the previous 5 days of the week, which those were torturous as well. And we sat down on Friday evening, and we watched a live broadcast of Lyle Lovett and Chris Isaak.
Ah, yes.
And it was so interesting because they did it remotely, just as we record our podcast remotely. Mm-hmm. They couldn't play songs together. They couldn't have their bands because, social distancing, and you don't get to go into anyone's house anymore. Mm-hmm. And so they just kind of took it in turns to play a song solo, and then they would chat, and then they would play a song solo, and it was magnificent. It was just so nice. It was such a good time. And then because it was such a good time, my wife and I afterwards put on Deadpool.
Oh, yes. And yes.
For this reason, our 13-year-old is desperate to watch Deadpool. So is the 10-year-old, to be honest, but the 13-year-old. And so my wife and I watched Deadpool through the eyes of parents of a 13-year-old who wants to watch it.
So your eyes, you watched it through your eyes. That's what you're saying.
But I'm not, because here's the interesting part of that. Here's the interesting
Are you cosplaying another family, like through the eyes of our friends who also have a 13-year-old?
No, it was like this. Tamara and I, my wife Tamara and I have watched Deadpool together multiple times, but we've only ever watched it as two people enjoying Deadpool as a movie.
Yeah.
Right? This time we were watching it as our parental selves, asking ourselves, is there any of this we could show the 13-year-old? The answer is no, there isn't.
No.
There's no part. But this leads me to my question. Did you ever watch Once Upon a Deadpool with your kids?
I did, and I've got to tell you, Deadpool needs to be dirty. I felt that Once Upon a Deadpool was so milquetoast, so just. And
so that was the conversation Tamara and I were having, which was, if you took out the non-kid or young person appropriate bits of this, there's no movie. There's nothing at the heart of that, because the theme, the overarching narrative, is an adult theme, and I didn't know what would be left of the movie. The movie would be like a 20-minute cut of things flying through the air, and so it was interesting. It was really interesting, and so yes, our conclusion at the end of it was two-part. A, the 13-year-old doesn't have a snowball's hell and chance of seeing this movie, probably before he's 18. Personally, I think I would do it at 16. But anyhow, that's just between us. And secondly, we're not going to compromise and watch Once Upon a Deadpool. It's got to be the whole thing. It's the movie or bust.
So let's rewind the clock to Jason at 13 years of age. What were you watching at 13 years of age?
No, my parents had a strict lockdown
right.
on the VHS movies that I was allowed. No, meanwhile, my very best friend Ryan came from he was the eldest of 6, and he was the one blazing the trail. And his parents were nowhere near as restrictive as my parents.
Yeah.
And so occasionally he would tell me, like, I remember when he saw Beverly Hills Cop with Eddie Murphy, and my parents had seen it. And I told my parents, Ryan has seen this and I would like to see it.
Yeah.
And I was probably 14, 15 at that point. I said, I'd really like to see this movie. And they said, no chance. None at all. It's not appropriate for you. And I was kind of like, well, that's not cool. But I never saw it. And so,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, if we could turn back the clock and if Deadpool existed for me at my eldest son's age, no, I would have less than a snowball's chance in hell of ever seeing that movie.
Oh, yeah. Not.
I'm guessing it wasn't the same in your house.
It was not the same in my house. Yes, it was all the R-rated all the time, and it was.
From what age? From what age?
That's a good question. Well, perfect. I have the perfect answer. The movie Alien, the first Alien movie, came out in 1978, I want to say. I think it might have been 77, 78. And that was an R-rated movie, and my mother took me to see it. And I remember I was so obsessed with the xenomorphs that I had one of the tall, like 18-inch tall xenomorphs that had, when you grabbed the back of their head, it had a little like lever, a little handle. When you squeezed it, the xenomorph mouth would open and the second mouth would come out. And I
have seen those.
And I remember going to school on picture day, and I refused to go in and have my picture taken unless it was with my xenomorph. And I was wearing a tan turtleneck with a dark brown leather vest, my 8 is enough big bushy like wannabe haircut, and the xenomorph, and that was it. Like, I was obsessed. So yeah, yep, age 6, age 5, whatever it was.
That's unbelievable. Gosh. I remember there was one night my parents had brought home Enter the Dragon.
Oh yeah,
And I think I've got the name right of the Bruce Lee movie. And we're watching this Bruce Lee movie, and obviously I would have been 10 or younger, because I remember which house we were in, and it was a house that we only lived in until I was 10 years old. So I would have been 10 or younger, and my mum had just picked up a kung fu movie. And so this would have been the early 80s, no later than the mid 80s. And we're watching the kung fu movie, and there's a love scene in it. And this woman straddles Bruce Lee and takes off her top and her brassiere.
Whoa.
And my parents, both of them, kind of looked at me at the exact same time as I was just like, no idea where to look. And my mum said, "Jason, cover your eyes." And I literally put my hands over my eyes and waited for that scene to be done.
Did you open a finger or two to kind of like peek at the boobies? No. Really?
No. Oh no, I was too mortified by what was happening in front of me. And so yeah, I covered my eyes, and then when the scene was over and my mum had said, "Okay, you can uncover your eyes now," they both said, "We're thinking this movie probably isn't for you, and so run along and play or head to bed or what have you." And I was more than happy to get out of that situation. I was like, "Peace out. I'll be sleeping if anybody needs me."
Were you happy to get out of that situation because you were taught that wasn't proper and you shouldn't be looking at it, or that you kind of wanted to look at it, but man, that's weird looking at that with your parents in the room?
There was definitely the overall weirdness of boobs being on the TV screen while my parents were sitting in the living room. Like that was just out of body level uncomfortable. But even at that age, it wasn't something that was really on my radar. Like that wasn't
There you go.
something of interest. I'll also tell you this. I'll tell you this very quickly, and then we'll get over to Cara. Sorry for keeping you waiting here, Cara. When I was but a boy, and I was in this same house, so I know I was 10 or younger, the A-Team came to British TV, right? B.A. Baracus, Hannibal, and Mad Dog Murdoch, and Face. Can't leave Face out. Face was my brother's favourite.
All right.
And my brother, of course, is 7 years younger than me, and so he would have been 3 or younger when it was released. And it was released onto like Sunday afternoon TV, definitely a weekend afternoon TV. And my mum had said, let me watch this show first and see if it's appropriate. Mm-hmm. And we all know, right, the A-Team, like lots of guns, lots of making of machines, a lot of shooting of those guns, but nobody getting shot, no blood on the screen, right? Just kind of guys who roll and then they don't move anymore. and my mum sent me out the house, out the room while she watched it and made the decision on whether a weekend afternoon showing of the A-Team TV series was appropriate. Now, the good news is it got the thumbs up, but she wasn't overly happy with the level of gun violence in it.
You know, growing up in America, that was just par for the course. But I can understand, you know, growing up in Scotland, growing up in a country where guns just are not a thing. Even police officers don't have guns. Like, I get that. I get how that could be alarming. Yep.
It was interesting for us because I first noticed this, you know, as a late teen coming over to the United States, that American TV was perfectly fine with violence at really any time of the day or night, but sex was totally off the table. And you know, when I stopped being 10 and became some other ages, the BBC was always good for a Saturday night movie, you know, BBC Two, because it would be art house, and you would get to see some boobs on the TV after what we call the watershed. Do you have the watershed over here?
No, I don't think so.
Like you would get to a point at say 9 p.m. where it was just assumed children were off to bed and programming.
10 p.m.
You know,
10 p.m. Yep.
Okay, 10 p.m. over 10 here. PM. And so these art house movies that you might find, and so yes, as a you know. 14, 15-year-old with parents who wouldn't let me watch Beverly Hills Cop, I would be watching black and white art house movies on BBC Two, just waiting for a flash of boob. Just like, please let this be the night. Please let this be the night. And they were, you know, sometimes they would come through for a young man in need.
Indeed. I require a boob.
But yeah, out of an hour and a half movie, you would maybe get, you know, 15 seconds of boob, but it would carry over to the next week's lockdown. Not lockdown, we're in lockdown. Weekend. We'll carry you through to the next weekend.
Let me get us off of the movie conversation with this. Last night and I don't know why we didn't start this sooner. Mostly because we're dumb, I think. But last night we started...
I'll second that.
Easy. Last night we started what I hope will become a COVID tradition. That's a funny series of words right there. Where we said, you know what, let's do... Because we've had family movie nights, and we've had plenty of them. But what we never did was, we're going to have family movie night on the Sunday, and every week someone new gets the chance to pick the movie.
I've got terrible news for you, Joshua. It only ends one way.
I have a feeling about this, but let me tell you. I got to pick...
We used to have that in our house.
Yeah, it didn't work. Yeah.
No, it went the way of the dodo.
Yeah.
I was just done with people crying every Saturday night. Oftentimes me.
Well, have you considered oftentimes you. All right. So it's not you picking bad movies, it's your kids picking bad movies making you cry?
Little column A, little column B.
Well, I picked the movie last night. I gave Heidi the chance as, the matriarch of the house. She said, it's too much pressure. You have to do it.
See, she gets it.
So I picked Stand By Me.
All right.
Yep.
Suck a dick. That's a line in that movie that's
Oh, yeah.
Suck a fat one. I remember that line.
Oh, yeah. There's another great line where it says, Corey Feldman says, but a pile of shit has 1,000 eyes.
It's a great movie. I clearly, my perspective, I remember seeing that as a boy. Mm-hmm. Also, the Stephen King novel is fantastic as well. And I was obviously into Stephen King as a 14-year-old. But I could see how I would respond to that movie as a teenage boy, watching these teenage boys being teenage boys. Mm-hmm. How did your girls do? What was their perspective?
Yeah, they were fine. I mean, yes, it's rated R, but the TV rating system, calm down. The TV rating system has it as a TV 14. Right? So, and I think the TV 14 comes from, there is no nudity, right? There's no overt violence happening.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's, of course, vulgar language and suggestive language and all of that. And, my girls weren't too fussed by it. I was surprised that, they would have seen a group of 4 12-year-old boys smoking cigarettes and saying, why are these 12-year-old boys smoking cigarettes? And no, that didn't come up. So, yeah, all in all, everybody enjoyed it. And I'll tell you, it really held up. It really brought back so much for me personally.
It's definitely one I've wanted to revisit for myself. I don't know if we in our house could pull off the 13-year-old and the 10-year-old seeing it, but it's definitely on my list. I will tell you this very quickly. I think we've said very quickly a few times here. A few years ago, it was the winter holidays. We were deep in December, and my wife and I thought, this is probably the right time for our boys to see Home Alone. And we put on Home Alone, and our boys asked us to turn it off because
it's such a terrible movie.
Kevin being abandoned by himself at
scary.
home. Yeah. Scary is the word.
Yeah.
They found it scary. It was like a kid's horror movie. We didn't even get to the bad guys trying to break in. We only got to the point where he was bouncing on the bed, making himself pancakes and taking whipped cream straight from the can. That they didn't like, let alone what was coming next.
Wow.
Yeah, they were really... And we haven't revisited that movie since then. Like, anytime that movie gets any mention, our boys look at each other and kind of shudder a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from that perspective, I completely understand. Also, I've just never liked it. So, I can appreciate it from that standpoint as well. He was so annoying, that kid. Ugh.
Okay. Precocious, I think, is the word, but anyway.
So we've gone on probably for a good 18 minutes, not having mentioned anything about whiskey, not having mentioned anything about our amazing guest.
That sounds like us.
Yeah, it does. It does sound like us. But I'm so excited to have Cara Laing here with us, and it was actually your idea to bring her on to the podcast.
I was going to say, do you mind if I take the floor?
Yeah, please, yeah.
On this one? Because it's... When you and I started this podcast, those many years ago, we really wanted to have a focus on independent bottlers. Mm-hmm. And in the early days of our interviews, that's exactly where our focus was. And we had David Stirk, and we had Mark Watt. Was it Stephen from Gordon MacPhail?
Richard.
Right.
From Richard Urquhart. It was Richard Urquhart.
Okay, Richard Urquhart. So we had him on from Gordon MacPhail. do we have others? We've clearly talked to Ollie along the way about Single Malts of Scotland. So we realised that we couldn't just have the focus be on independent bottlers, and so we expanded beyond that. But what's kind of happened is, in expanding beyond that, it's been a while since we've had an independent bottler on the podcast.
Too long, yeah.
And so Whisky show put on by the Whisky Exchange. One of the very first main stage events I watched was an independent bottler's tasting, hosted by our very good friend Billy Abbott, who's a lovely, lovely human being.
That is.
And he hosted Ollie Chilton, good friend, Mark Watt, good friend, and Cara Laing, who we'd never met.
Yep.
And so in watching it, I was like, we've had Billy on the pod, we've had Ollie on the pod, we've had Mark on the pod. Mark's even taken over the pod with Jess for an episode, and we've never even spoken to Cara Laing. And so I watched that main stage, and I really liked what Cara had to say. And, she was very interesting. She was obviously very knowledgeable. And she was very honest. And one thing that you and I are always drawn to is people who will talk transparently.
Yep.
And so, the week, I let the week of the Whisky show run because, obviously it was 7 days and it was fantastic. And I loved tuning into it, and I loved watching some sessions, and we were a part of some sessions and watching some other main stage events. And so it was really good. And so I knew Cara would be busy through all of that. And so I waited until that week was over, and I emailed her and I said, "Hi, Cara. Watched you on the main stage, saw you talking with, 3 good friends of ours, and really regret the fact that Joshua and I have never met you, never talked to you.
Yeah.
We would love, love, love to have you on the podcast." And I did. I gave it its Sunday name. I didn't give it its known nickname, Padcost. I did keep it to its Sunday name of podcast. And Cara wrote back and she said, "Oh, I would love to be on the podcast." And we sorted out some dates, and lo and behold, we had such a wonderful conversation with Cara Laing, and I got to pivot back to some of the things she'd started talking about on that main stage when she was sharing the time with 2 other guests and the wonderful Billy.
Yeah.
And nothing was off the table with her. And yeah, it was just really nice. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so, as always happens, now we're saying, okay, when restrictions are lifted and when travel happens again, Joshua and I are clearly going to be in Glasgow in the future. Let's meet up.
Yeah.
Let's talk over a dram. Let's taste some things together. I'm so excited for that to happen. And so,
yeah, same.
As you and I always say, the independent bottling world is a wonderful world. We don't think of ourselves as competitors with one another.
No.
We think of ourselves all occupying the same little niche. And if we can help one another, we do help one another. It's so nice to talk to other independent bottlers. And Cara gets into this in the interview, where it's great to be in the whiskey industry. It's great to select casks. But so little of our day-to-day business is selecting casks. And you start to have logistic problems, and you start to have bottling problems, and you start to have... She does give a horror story later in the interview that I will say nothing about.
Yeah. Oh, that was crazy.
Yeah, dear listener, your jaw will drop. Be prepared. It was hard to formulate questions after that little horror story. And so it is. It's nice to talk with somebody who knows this industry the way we know the industry. They see the same things that we see. And so for your first time talking to Cara, what were your takeaways? And then we'll give the floor to Cara.
Well, firstly, I personally wish I just had more time to be part of the conversation because, and just so listeners are aware, the first half of the conversation includes both me and Jason, but because the UK falls back, rewinds the clock a week before we do in the US, it screwed up my calendar. So I thought I was going to have a good 2 hours. We ended up just having the hour, and I had to leave early. What I really enjoyed about it was hearing from her as a third generation person within Douglas Laing, and hearing her story of how she came into it, and you can hear that it was clearly life changing in a way, but life aligning as well. Like she had no interest in whiskey; that wasn't her thing, and you'll hear about this when she talks about it, and then everything just comes together, and it felt as if she's now in the place that she was meant to be, right? At least that's the sense that I got, and I loved hearing that. I think that whiskey business aside, labeling issues, warehousing stuff, all of that aside, I loved hearing that family story. That I just thought that was great.
Well, think about a company that's 62 years old, and Cara having, that benefit, that pleasure of being the granddaughter of the founder. And I cast my mind, 50 more years into the future for us, and can't help but wonder, will there be a third generation looking after Single Cask Nation? What might that look like? And and Cara gets into this in the interview as well. What might we have laid down that we will never see, that we will never taste, that will be released by a future generation? And that's an exciting thought. And so I love the fact that Cara is that granddaughter. She is that third generation. She is living that life of agreements that were made, casks that were laid down. But again, as she says, that realigning, that recent realigning of the company that presented its own challenges. So anyway, I could keep going here. I'm going to stop. I'm going to edit myself. One thing before we throw the floor over to Cara, later in the interview, we had a couple of very small technical issues. And you will hear Joshua in post had to make a few maneuvers to make things work for us. Please know that the technical issues were out of our control. And Joshua has done a lovely job of splicing audio together.
You honor me, sir.
Off to Cara Laing.
So you want to get us started here, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I've called you here today, Cara, is I thoroughly enjoyed, as I said in the email, I thoroughly enjoyed you being on the main stage at Whisky Live, and the virtual Whisky Live show. And you really got me thinking.
It wasn't Whisky Live. It was just the Whiskey Show.
Whiskey Exchange
show.
London show.
Yes, I was thinking it was live technically. I was using it in a verb.
Fair enough.
So
fair enough.
So the Whiskey Show, the virtual Whiskey Show main stage, you were in an independent bottler presentation, tasting through one of the packs. But in listening to you, you uncovered so many aspects of the independent bottling business that it really had me reaching out to Joshua and saying, why haven't we had Cara on the podcast? We've made a terrible, terrible mistake here. And so we are remedying that mistake with this conversation. And so the first question I've got for you is, what is it like being third generation at Douglas Laing? There's clearly benefits, there's clearly challenges. What's it like for you in that realm?
You've summed it up well with lots of positives, lots of challenges. The positives definitely are it's quite special working in a business that your grandpa set up, and it's great working with family members and being able to really influence and build a really good team of passionate people around you. That's definitely a massive positive of I guess the family business aspect. I would say that the challenge probably is the pressure, because you literally live and breathe it. There's no downtime. Whether you're on holiday or weekends or evenings, you're always thinking about it. The flip side to that is I genuinely love whiskey, and it wasn't always the case, but I love drinking it, I love talking about it, I love working with it. So that definitely helps get a bit of balance. I think if you didn't have that, you'd probably really resent the working weekends, working on holiday, working evenings. But it's the positives definitely outweigh the challenges, and thankfully Fred, my dad, and our chairman has given me and Chris, my husband, who's our CEO, increasing free rein to really take the business to the next level, which is very much what we're working on. And it's hard work, but it's a lot of fun in the process. So lots of positives. I'd be lying if I said that working with my husband and my father was always a dream. There are many days where it's far from the case.
When you were growing up, did you have plans? Did you have hopes or desires that you would come into the company? Were you the opposite side of that? Did you think your career would take you in a very different direction?
I don't totally remember. I have early memories of being very young and having the cold or flu and being given hot toddies and just thinking the whiskey aspect of it was the most ridiculously disgusting stuff. And I've got a lot of memories of growing up with sort of leading lights from the whiskey industry coming to the house or being involved, or referring to some of them as Uncle this and Uncle that. So I was always around it. I don't think I ever really thought I would get into it, and certainly the older I got, I had no interest in getting into the whiskey industry. Polar opposite, I really didn't like it, and at uni and in my first couple of jobs, had no intention of drifting into whiskey. It was only when I went to White Mackay, mainly with the hope of landing a marketing job on one of their vodka brands, because at the time I drank vodka and I was passionate about vodka, which is now a very strange thing to get my head around. But it was there that they moved me quite quickly onto the Jura brand, and thereafter it just literally spiraled from there. So that was in 2006, and ever since it's properly been part of every day of my life.
Right, there's no getting away from that.
No.
Did you come out of university and go into spirits, or was there even a moment there?
Strangely enough, I did my dissertation in my final year of uni. I based it on the spirits category, but very much on youth drinking culture within spirits. So nothing on heritage and provenance and everything you'd think of with whiskey. And then my first job was in a marketing or advertising agency through in Edinburgh, where I did work on some spirit brands, but it wasn't something I was specifically looking for. And it was when I moved back to Glasgow, because this job at White Mackay came up and just sounded quite interesting, and I was quite keen to get to Glasgow, and thought, well, vodka's a fun category. I did my dissertation in kind of the vodka category, that it just felt a good fit. And I was disappointed when I didn't get to work on one of their vodka brands. I was really quite disgruntled at being put on Jura on my first day. And yet I ended up leaving White Mackay because they took me off Jura and put me onto a non-whiskey brand, and I was like, can't do this. So it's amazing how it does. I mean, Fred always says to me, whiskey's in your blood. You know, your grandpa loved it. I love it. I've married someone that loves it. Our children seem to show an unusual interest and enthusiasm for whiskey. But there was definitely a period in my life where I wanted to work in anything other than whiskey. But it does, it gets to you, and I think it just grows on you. And I definitely believe from a taste perspective, you go on that whiskey journey, and in truth, I'd now really struggled to drink a 40% strength Jura whiskey, but I remember I'd find it like diluting juice. But I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
Absolutely.
But I remember my first few days and weeks at White Mackay finding Jura really challenging, even at 40%, thinking this is fiery and like just too much. But it's amazing how now I would appreciate those flavours, and I'd want more of them, and I'd want it at a higher strength because it's just what my palate's got used to and now demands.
So what was the one whiskey that switched you from being passionate about clear spirits to brown spirits?
In truth, probably Jura. It was definitely my stepping stone into whiskey. Fred assures me in all these hot toddies it was either 18 to 25-year-old great quality blend or Port Ellen I was being given in them. But I suppose they were my first tasters, but I mean it was definitely Jura, which probably actually is a good one to start with. It's a sort of fairly typical Highlander, so it was reasonably mellow and gentle, and a good introduction, and it was great because Richard Patterson spent a lot of time with me, and Fred likewise at the time was, I think, quite enthused by the fact I was beginning to show an enthusiasm for whiskey, so they both kind of nurtured it and encouraged it, and it just from there developed massively and quite quickly. And at White Mackay got to try their other brands, and probably there had the first chance of trying whiskey straight out of the cask in a warehouse, which is something I still love. I know none of us get to do it as much anymore, but to be able to get the Valinge and have the cask opened, dip the Valinge and a dram straight from the cask, there's nothing quite like it. It's very special.
Agreed. Although we always tell the nation we never select casks in that setting because it is far too romantic and everything tastes wonderful straight from a cask.
True.
And the worst whiskies taste amazing.
And you're right. You are thrown by it because it is such a special experience. But I remember doing it one day at Bowmore and genuinely believing there was ripe bananas floating around this cask because it was like drinking. I've never drunk banana juice, but it was just so vanilla rich and banana and sweet and wonderful. And I suspect again that was me being thrown by the fact I was standing in their vaults beneath sea level and it was all perfect and romantic, and I believed the marketing hype.
I'll buy it all.
Yeah.
I'll take it all. So coming out of White Mackay then and being taken off of Jura and being offered vodka, how did Douglas Laing come about?
I then had a stint at Bowmore. So I moved, I finished up at White Mackay in late 2009, and in January 2010 joined Morris and Bowmore, obviously under Beam Suntory, as brand manager for Bowmore, which was just wonderful. And whilst Jura played a key role in getting me into whisky, Bowmore absolutely sealed that I would never work in any other industry.
Wow.
I had it's terrible. I had three and a half great years at Morrison Bowmore, looking after Bowmore and indeed Glengarry, which I totally grew to love. It's such an underrated Highland malt, but it's
Agreed.
It's phenomenal. There I just got more and more into whisky, and again learned from some great people, got to visit all their experiences, got to visit all their distilleries, had so many chances to try whisky straight out of the cask. To be honest, that's the only times really I've been able to do it. In here we probably, like yourselves, get the sample bottles, much like these, and try them at our desks where it's not nearly as romantic. But it was after Morrison Bowmore when I then joined Douglas Laing in middle of 2013. And that was my first experience of an independent bottler, and just found it a wildly different experience, but quite an exciting one because it's just so varied and you get involved in every aspect of it.
I've got so many questions, and I don't know if they're all appropriate.
I'm sure you can edit them out then.
in returning to the family business, right? Was there a part where your dad was kind of like, yes, today's my day, or was there, well, let's hold on a second, you don't have independent bottling experience here? Like, what were your thinkings in coming into the family, and what were your dad's? And obviously at that time there were more owners under the umbrella. What was that kind of back and forth like?
Great question. I don't think I've ever actually properly been asked. I really didn't want to leave.
Because it's probably inappropriate to
No,
ask,
well, I think enough time is probably now settled, or the dust has settled.
Good.
I didn't really want to leave Morrison Bowmore. I was very happy, and career-wise, it was all great, but obviously Fred parted ways with his brother, and his brother left the business, and that was all in early to mid 2013, and Fred, who had never ever put pressure on me to show signs of interest in whisky or the family business, sort of indicated to me it would mean a lot to him, and it would help him and the future of the business if I would consider joining. So whilst I didn't want to leave Morrison Bowmore, it was a hard one to say no to your dad, and also because I realised it was an exciting opportunity. The positive is I also realised that whilst outwardly Douglas Laing had a great reputation, I think, and looked like a very well-oiled machine, I knew from family conversations that was far from the case, and that it would be really hard work. So it was mixed feelings. I was so sad to leave Morrison Bowmore and to leave. I'll only ever have positive memories of my time there and working on Bowmore. And it's still, whenever samples of Bowmore or Glengarry or Auchentoshan come in, I'm like, I've got first dibs on them. But it was the right time, and actually probably in hindsight it was the perfect time, because then things changed massively at Morrison Bowmore Distillers, and and I joined in here at Douglas Laing at the right time, because it was we basically had to rebuild the company,
Sure.
which was definitely challenging. I mean, the first I would say from 2013 through till middle end of 2014, it felt like a new business, actually, whilst Fred thankfully had retained Douglas Laing and our heritage of having been around since 1948, we had a hell of a job to do.
I can't believe how long ago it was now. Like this news. Whenever I think about that split, it's always just last year for me.
I know.
Every new year, it's last year. And
and Cara was already in the company.
Yeah,
Like,
wow.
it's just...
No,
really...
I know. Well, it happened just or not long before Chris and I got married. So, and we've just had our 7th wedding anniversary. So I too am a bit like, how on earth, where has that time gone? But I think that might just be a sign of getting older, sadly.
That is also true. That is true.
That's a thing.
And you mentioned earlier kids. How old are your kids?
We've got a 3-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl.
Wow.
And it's amazing when again, we're not indoctrinating them and whatever career path they choose, will encourage. But if you say to our 5-year-old, what are the ingredients in whiskey? She goes, water, barley, yeast. So, like, it took me till I was about 20 to know that. So, she's doing quite well.
I always tell a story about coming home from Catoctin Creek Distilling Company, just an hour and 3/4 up the road from me. And I had a little sample bottle that was perfectly clear. And I gave it to my then 5-year-old. And I said, what's the one thing we know about this sample? And he looked at it and he said, it's never been in wood.
Amazing.
Wow.
And that's the kid who has no interest in being part of the company. But his younger brother has his eyeballs on the company and helps me in my office a lot.
So there's your succession plan.
Yeah.
Nailed.
That's
there you
it.
go. My daughters don't have much interest, though earlier on, my 12-year-old, who was then maybe 5, I put a Glenfarclas 105 in front of her. And I said, well, because she always wanted to smell the glass. And so, what do you smell? And I'll never forget this tasting note. She said, it smells like, well, she said the fall, but autumn. She said, it smells like the fall. It was the leaves. It was that crispness in the air, that sort of heavy kind of earthy smell that you can kind of get sometimes. I said, "Oh my gosh, this is it. This is the future of the company.
But
this
no
is the
interest.
next generation." Yeah, not anymore. Yeah, she
no, that's impressive. Well, I wouldn't have either at that age, so there's maybe hope still.
Right. Right. They got to go plough their own furrow, make their way back.
Yeah. Well, and learn from other companies' mistakes. That for Fred was a big thing of, I don't really want to bring you in fresh out of uni. Like, go elsewhere, see what other industries are like, and ideally make mistakes elsewhere and cost other companies money.
That's George Grant's line. Mm-hmm. His dad sent him away from Glenfarclas to go make his mistakes on somebody else's dime.
Really? Didn't know that? And
then return to Glenfarclas. Yeah, the dad did the same thing there.
It's that canny Scottish attitude we've all got.
So another question for me, Joshua. I'm really taking over the questions. I've got literally hundreds of questions,
and I'm letting you do that. I do have other questions, but I love the direction that we're going in, so I'm not stepping on your toes. Just remember, and just so you're aware, Cara, I have to get off 5 minutes to the hour. You two can carry on, but because of the hour difference, my whole calendar today is messed up. So
okay,
anyway.
No problem.
Cool. I'll continue with the thread here. You're talking about coming into the company and looking it over, and on one hand, it almost being like a new company. In terms of that strategy, as you sat there of that day, 2013 into 2014, what did you, and obviously Fred, and obviously Chris, was Chris in at that point? Chris?
He joined not long after me, so basically, yes.
So within that window there, what did you decide going forth? What did the industry look like? What did you want to respond to in that time? And what did you, it's not a word I actually like using, so I'm surprised I'm using it right now. What did you strategize for the next 5 years?
Well, yeah, I hate strategy. And strategy, it's not, and I'm not very good at it. Luckily, Chris is. So he and I quite quickly, he thinks one way, I think quite differently, but it seems to work. And I think having been in bigger companies, we recognised that Douglas Laing's biggest strength was also its curse, and it's these single cask bottlings which are so wonderful, but they are also so inconsistent, and we really struggled with that because we'd been used to, Chris also is from the whisky industry, and we'd been used to brands where you build the brand and consumers fall in love with Bowmore 12 years old and they can get it time and time again. And we kind of saw that in Big Pete. So we quickly realised that, yes, the single cask business is great, but it's, by their very nature, they come and they go, and it's quite difficult to get consumers and distributors and retailers falling in love with them because you offer no continuity. So we quite quickly realised that Big Pete was a great member of the family, and we needed to really nurture and develop him. But we absolutely didn't want to lose sight of the single cask side, which Fred had actually brought to Douglas Laing when the company was in a not great position in the, must have been the sort of mid-90s, when the blend market, particularly out in Asia, had just gone belly up, and Fred recognised a need to reinvent the business and had admired Gordon and MacPhail for a long time because we shared a lot of distributors with them back in the 90s. And so it was Fred who brought the single cask business to Douglas Laing back then, and we didn't want to lose that at all. We wanted to make it a bit slicker, make it run a bit better, so we put in place quite a lot of new ways of working, a lot of it to do with dry materials, making our packaging just work a bit harder for us. Not the glamorous side of it, but a fact of life and reality for all us independent bottlers. But also wanted to really grow and nurture Big Pete, so looked at just how can we improve his spirit profile, the wood policy around Big Pete, and then quite quickly decided Big Pete needed a companion in the form of Scallywag. So it was in 2013 we also launched Scallywag as the Speyside marriage of single malts. So I would say that was our biggest change, but at the same time, we were changing distributors around the world, and we were trying to regrow the team because we had, for loads of reasons, we had changed the Douglas Laing team in terms of personnel quite massively as well.
Okay.
Remarkable.
Wow.
We didn't sleep much. There were a lot of late nights.
So my questioning goes along sort of a slightly different path, Jason, but it is tied a bit to Big Pete. If you wanted to carry on, that's fine. If you're willing to...
I'll let you wander off, and then,
okay.
If I need to pivot back or reshape it. But I want to hear your question.
So there's a question that's been rattling around in my head for a while, and I asked myself this question quite a lot, and I think you started to answer it a bit with Big Pete and with Scallywag. There are a lot of independent bottlers. Nowadays, there are a lot of independent bottlers. Early on, there weren't many, right? Gordon MacPhail, yourselves, right? Cadden Heads, Duncan Taylor, right? So on. There was this core of independent bottlers. And I always thought from the perspective of appealing to the consumer, how has Douglas Laing pitched itself as a point of difference? Now, obviously, your points of difference, you've got Big Pete, you've got Scallywag, you've got all of these things, but from a single cask standpoint, or just the slightly more traditional style of independent bottling, how do you separate yourselves from the rest, or how do you aim to do that?
Yeah, great question, because it's a very cluttered space, and I guess that's part of the reason why we've created the regional malts. In terms of looking at our sort of traditional single cask brands, so the likes of Old Particular or Extra Old Particular or Provenance, I guess one of our strengths, and I suppose what sets us apart, is my grandpa had the foresight and sense to establish these filling programs, which I touched on the Whisky Exchange show, whereby we don't just rely on brokers. I mean, we do work with some brokers, but most of our spirit has come straight off the still. We have purchased it when it's still straight off the still and put it into our own wood, and it's allowed us to access distilleries that a lot of the newer independent bottlers haven't been able to access. But it's a really challenging marketplace, and it requires consumers to have a lot of knowledge and understanding of whiskey, because at a level consumers are like, well, why would I buy a Douglas Laing Talisker 10-year-old when I can just go to my supermarket and buy one in there? And I think for us, the kind of biggest message we always like to hammer home, and it applies to most independent bottlers in truth, but is the fact that us, the independent bottlers, do bring consumers as close as most consumers can get to drinking a whiskey straight out the cask in this amazing, dark, damp Scottish warehouse. But I think specifically in terms of what would set Douglas Laing apart, it's probably the distillery or the distillery malt that we can access, and the introduction of these regional vatted or blended malts, which a lot of people are like, why on earth are you putting great Kalila or Blair Athol or whatever it may be into these malts? And I guess it's because we recognise there are so many independent bottlers out there doing a great job of releasing wonderful single casks from across Scotland, but where we can kind of put our own stamp on it is going back to the art of blending, which was something my grandpa basically established the company with. Fred's got a real love for it, and slowly I'm trying to learn in a very non-scientific, technical way, but slowly trying to learn how to get that great blend and balance. So I think that probably is increasingly what sets us apart.
Mm-hmm. And when you go around discussing your brand, working with the public or distributors, shops, bars, etc., do you find or do you feel that it's a never-ending uphill battle with a certain segment of people, and probably a larger segment of people compared to our customers, of, oh, you don't know what an independent bottler is? All right, let's go over it. And so that's question one. And in question two, do you see potentially brands like Big P as a foot in the door for those people who might be interested in dipping their toe into something that isn't a bottle of Macallan or a bottle of Bowmore or a bottle of, name the brand here?
I think yes to the independent bottler piece. I think within that, my biggest gripe is when you get the assumption that the independent bottlers get the dregs that distillers don't want.
Yeah.
Because it's fundamentally not the case. And in truth, the big boys don't have the interest or capacity to go around each of their casks and go, that's a good one, that's a bad one, so give that to Douglas Laing. That's rubbish, so give that to whoever. It doesn't work that way, and we know it doesn't work that way because of the way we do our fillings. It's it's in truth, it's generally more about the wood policy anyway, in my opinion. But to me, that's a bit of a challenge. It's an incorrect myth within the independent bottler community that we just get the leftovers that no one else wants. And I think, yes, it's just yet another thing to explain to consumers that you're not a distiller and this is what an independent bottler does, and don't be alarmed by it. And then you've got to explain why it's your brand but also someone else's brand featured on the label. And it's just and the other aspect is, and again, there's huge positives around it, but independent bottler labels have to carry so much information, and people don't have much time, and you get put off when you've got to read screeds of stuff. So it's I think there's enough of a passionate whiskey enthusiast community, though, that thankfully understand what independent bottlers do and what wonderful whiskies we release. And I think consumers more and more, whether they're whiskey enthusiasts or not, they appreciate things not being tampered with and not having things added or removed. Yeah. And again, I think that's what we're all great at. That, I mean, very much our philosophy is as natural as it gets. You know, don't add caramel colouring, don't chill filter, because you just remove all the meat and guts and good stuff. Keep it at high strength, because actually, if you don't like it at high strength, you can add a bit of water and make the whiskey go a bit longer, but you'll probably quite like that big chunky 56% bad boy. But yeah, in terms of Big Pete, I mean, again, we've got an uphill challenge rather with Big Pete, because and all the regional malts, because they have to carry the word blended malt Scotch whisky. Yeah. And the number of consumers who see blend and they think it's poison. And it's hugely frustrating, because in truth, Big Pete and Rock Island and Timorous Beastie and Scallywag are far more difficult for us to create than the independent bottling single cask stuff. There's far more art and skill and work involved in them. But the fact it's got the dreaded word blend makes it always a bit of a challenge. But I think when people get their head around it, they appreciate it's only a marriage of single malts, and actually there is art involved.
Well, hopefully, at least in the U.S., with these terrible 25% tariffs that have been put onto single malt, hopefully that's helped some of your blends a bit from a pricing standpoint.
I think it has. I mean, it's a shame the rest of the world's in turmoil as well. So the upside a year ago that we would have seen with that, I think we aren't feeling as much because of COVID and elections and everything else. But the US whiskey audience, again, they know their stuff. I mean, at a level, it's like every market, but for consumers that really understand the category and or have a level of understanding of the category, I think they can appreciate a blend, whether it be a blended Scotch or a blended malt.
Yeah, I want to return to something that you've been using a few times in maybe the last 10 minutes or so, is wood management and wood policy.
I'm glad you went there.
And so what does that look for you within the company?
Well, again, I guess going back to the strategy piece, it's probably what Chris and I most borrowed from our time. He was also at Beam Suntory, and there it was instilled in us that about 70% of the end character of whiskey comes from the wood. And we very much brought that with us to Douglas Laing. So we're very focused on investing in really good casks. And again, because so much of our spirit comes from filling programs, we get the opportunity to supply our own casks. So we get the chance to go, actually, that malt would be phenomenal in a virgin oak cask, or that one would be phenomenal in an ex-Ardbeg cask, or whatever it may be. So both in terms of renewing empty casks and getting them back in the system and bringing in fresh casks, it's still work in progress. We're nowhere near done with it, but we focus very heavily on our wood and our casks, and place huge emphasis on having good wood, because it makes such a huge difference. And it's also quite fun to experiment with. We've been doing a bit of that over the last year and a half with some interesting wood finishes, and particularly on our Epicurean, which is our lowland malt, which is archetypal lowland and very light and fresh and barley rich and sweet, and it just lends itself really well to interesting cask finishes, which actually is what is in my now empty glass. So we've had a couple of them finishing. In fact, we've had a lot of of Epicurean spirit finishing in different types of casks over about the last year and a half, and we're now beginning to see the effects really come through. So we had 3 releases this year, and we've got another 3 planned for 2021.
Nice.
That's fantastic.
Very nice. Yeah, when you talk about wood there, and obviously from Joshua's earlier question, where we are seeing so many independent bottlers appear, and part of your answer there being, well, when you see the broker lists or you see the parcels being released, it's very easy for a whole bunch of independent bottlers to release essentially the same whiskey. Getting into wood, getting into a cask program can really allow the independence to shine through in an independent bottler. And when we interviewed Ali Walker, when he created Infrequent Flyers, he was talking about the most exciting part he was wanting to get to was putting the whiskey that everybody's seeing into wood that not everybody is seeing.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of the zigging and the zagging. It's finding your own piece, and clearly I look across the fence at you, with a company dating back to the 1940s, and thinking, how wonderful, and such opportunity, and amazing contents in warehouse. And then hearing you say, well, actually 2013, 2014, it was like we were starting for the first time. So I feel like you're very attuned to the issues that Joshua and I deal with as an almost 10-year-old independent bottler. We've been seeing the same things with the same eyes. And that makes me feel quite good today.
Yeah, well, it's like therapy. It's quite nice to hear whether you've been around a long time or not that long a time, or you're a big team or a small team. I think we all have similar problems. But I think if you've got a love of whiskey, it helps, particularly when you can sit with lots of samples on your desk. It's amazing how that gets you through a tough morning.
That's so true. You'd mentioned before you've got a series of different filling contracts, so you're able to get some malts that maybe other people don't get, put it into wood that maybe others aren't putting it into, or there's a certain quality of wood that you demand that you need for the spirit. I wasn't in that meeting at the whiskey show, but Jason came off of that meeting with you and the others and said, I just witnessed the most brilliant conversation, between these great bottlers, and you want to know what one of the coolest takeaways was? I said, well, what's that? And he said that Douglas Laing is in part working on a handshake deal with and if we need to get that, if we need to edit that out, please let me know. But if you want to talk about that, I think that speaks volumes about the industry, right? That a handshake decades ago still means something. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. And the one maybe slightly edit out. I'd had quite a few whiskies that afternoon, but no, very much.
I'll put a beep over it. There you go.
I mean, it is true. It's just the company in question, you can imagine, are quite sticklers.
Of course. Yep.
No, very, very much. And I find it bizarre, but it is the wonderful thing about the whiskey industry. A number, and not dozens, but certainly a handful of the distillers who my grandpa had deals with that literally were a handshake and no written contract still stand with us today. And it is what's allowed us to be able to get our hands on filling programs. And these distillers that were independent back in the 40s, 50s are now part of some of the biggest companies in the world. But they honour that deal that was put in place, luckily and thankfully. And we're very appreciative of it. We don't take it for granted. And it's why we're firm members of the Scotch Whisky Association and do everything by the book. Because I think, again, going back to your earlier question about what sets us apart. Whilst most of us play by the rules, we recognise very much at Douglas Laing that, you know, you've got to be appreciative for the fact you're being able to access this wonderful spirit. So don't abuse it, and don't do daft labels or state things that are just going to annoy the bigger companies that make sure you get your spirit at the end of the day. There's a way of playing it fair and correctly.
To me, it's one of the guiding words across the industry, which, as independent bottlers, the only thing you really have is your reputation and that level of trust that you have with everybody here. And Joshua and I always say, you know, it took us 10 years to build up that reputation, and we worked on that reputation. But with our, you know, the distilleries that we work with directly, that trust. And we will go to our distillery partners and say, we're thinking about releasing your whiskey in this way. What do you think of that?
Nice.
You know, and really making it a very active two-way street where it's not just, oh, great, they sold us some liquid today and now we're running out the door to treat it however we want. And I like, in listening to you today as well, you're saying this exact same thing, right?
Yeah. I guess the other side is now we are getting a flavour of being the other side of the fence, because we now, in fact, exactly a year ago, we took ownership of Strathearn, tiny distillery in Perth.
And I wanted to come round to this, so yes, please run with this.
Okay, well, so last October, Douglas Laing brought Strathearn distillery in Perth into the family and into the mix, which saw us become distillers for the first time, which was lovely. Much like buying a house, however, you suddenly discover you've got about a month of just absolute excitement and intrigue, and it's all great, and then you start uncovering all the things that you didn't expect, and a year later that still happens, but it's come on leaps and bounds, and we're installing some new equipment to allow us to really increase the capacity, and doing lots of lovely things up there. But it's given us a flavour of being the other side, and we have single casks available from Strathearn, so suddenly you're getting people coming to you saying, I'd like to bottle my cask of Strathearn, and is it okay if I put this in the label, and can you approve this label? And again, you really appreciate that, because they're not off doing their own thing, they're checking in with you, they're asking for input and advice, and it's just quite funny, again, being on the receiving end of how it normally has worked for us. So the tables have turned, and we're in the midst of also building a distillery in Glasgow, so we're properly trying to get in amongst the distilling game as well. But I have to say, I still feel real love for the independent bottler side of Douglas Laing, and it will always be a key part of the business. It's not something we want to forget about.
So that's what surprised me this morning when somebody mentioned Strathearn to me and the Douglas Laing connection, and I thought of your distillery being the one in Glasgow. And so did you, and forgive my ignorance here, did you build Strathearn from the ground up? Are you a controlling partner? Is it a role within that distillery?
No, we didn't build it. Strangely enough, back in 2013, we went to speak to the owners about supporting them, working with them, maybe buying it. But again, we were just in a position of having to get our own house in order at Douglas Laing, so it went nowhere. And then, if you believe in fate, it came back around, and through last year, from about summer of last year, we were in talks with them. The owner of Strathearn wanted out, and we've always thought it was a really quaint boutique distillery in the Highlands. Really liked the spirit. It's very much in line with our ethos. We inherited all of the first batch of Strathearn single malt when we acquired the distillery. So We got the casks that are slumbering, but we also got quite a good volume of cased bottles. And I was a bit nervous because I was like, it's stock we're inheriting. How do we know it? It might not be good. It might not be, could be chill filtered and coloured to hell and back. But it's totally in line with our ethos. It's high strength. It's non-chill filtered. There's no colouring. It's young, and the distillery is not old, so it's generally about 5-year-old stock that is in the first release of Strathearn, but I'm yet to see a bad review about it in terms of spirit quality, and Douglas Laing can take no credit for it. It's been again a good distiller and good casks, but it's surprisingly mature and complex and got lots of depth and character for something so young. And again, it kind of goes back to good wood means good whiskey. Generally, I'm sure a lot of people would dispute that, but so it was an exciting addition, and I love getting up there and actually to roll your sleeves up and get involved and do a bit of a shift in the distillery. I was left on my last time I was up, I was left on my own, only for about half an hour, but the distiller was like, I need to run out, see as you're here, can you be in charge? And I was like, I don't actually know that I can. So I'm trying to think. I think the date was the 13th of September. So it's a batch of Strathearn to watch out for and definitely never buy. But it's lovely, and it's a small distillery, but we're increasing the capacity quite significantly, and again we're very focused on getting good casks and having a good plan in place. And once the world returns to a degree of normality, we're excited to be able to open the doors and have friends of Douglas Laing and Strathearn visit the distillery again.
Are they the ones just outside of Perth?
Yes, they are.
With an alembic still?
Yes.
Okay. I visited them in May of 2014.
Okay.
To have conversations about working together, and it didn't really go anywhere. But we tasted. They had some unique wood that they were maturing in,
and quite small casks.
Yes.
Yeah. So the belief, and clearly it worked, because the impact of the wood is significant, but their belief was the small casks really imparted far more depth and colour and had more of an impact. So it's ongoing work in progress, but it's moving in the right direction, and it's a fun place to visit and work a shift in as well. So
Strathearn is the Douglas Laing, in existence. Can you talk a little bit about the Glasgow plans there? Yes.
So we definitely prematurely unveiled our plans for Glasgow, slightly because we had to. We knew it was getting into the public domain. We would have quite liked to have quietly gone about our business and build the thing and start distilling, and then gradually be like, here's some product. But that didn't happen, and it's certainly been a learning curve. The theme of time passing quickly. This project's been on the go for 5 years, which in many ways is embarrassing, but is also quite a good example of the whisky industry slow, but the building industry is even slower. So it has been a painful process, but we are now it's now massively heating up, and it's actually far more than just a distillery. So we are moving to an all-encompassing site in Glasgow that will have our head office, our own bottling and warehousing facility, but also will be home to the Clutha distillery. So everything on one site, and in my mind, it will make a huge difference. It's, again, back to the production issues that we all have. to be able to be sitting in your office and then suddenly discover there's a problem on the bottling line, shove on your high-vis jacket and be down on the line, seeing what the problem is and trying to work out a solution. I'm so excited about that, and I'm so excited about actually being able to, again, walk out your head office and walk into a distillery. Apart from anything, it's that wonderful smell I love in a distillery. So it's exciting, and we're on track to be in through early to middle of next year.
Okay.
Finally, we had hoped to be in 2018, which was a big anniversary year for us, but 2 and a bit years later, we'll call it not too bad a result.
Whereabouts in Glasgow is it being set up?
That is the one bit we're not divulging.
Oh, okay.
So it's just outside Glasgow. I mean, it's still very central, but it's just it's not banging city centre Glasgow.
Sure.
But not far from it.
Well, it was just in terms of that project that you're describing there, thinking about getting land in Glasgow city centre would be difficult and expensive. But then also thinking about the distilleries that have come and gone in Glasgow, or the bottling plants that have come and gone, and thinking about how you can just be a little outside of the city centre and still be Glasgow proper, but have a large parcel of land on which to put all this together.
Well, this is the thing. We recognise it's not going to be the pretty countryside scenic distillery that Strathearn is for us, but we also, as you were saying, I mean, at one point Glasgow had 21 distilleries.
My goodness.
It had such an amazing distilling past, and we're very much a proud Glasgow company. We're a Glasgow family, and we wanted it to be our first distillery, which in a way it will be because we didn't build Strathearn, but it felt like an absolute no-brainer to do it that way. So it's exciting that it's progressing, and one we all can't wait to be in. And whilst it will be a lowlander and an urban distillery, we're very clear on the spirit style being far more like a really robust, big, chewy Highland malt. So kind of not what you'd expect is the theme. It won't be Auchentoshan, Glenkinchie, grassy, light, nutty. It will be really quite different. So things are moving, and the stills are being produced just now. And in fact, the meeting I was on before I joined you guys, we were talking about casks and cask storage and all that good stuff. So it's exciting to see it moving.
Are you able to reveal, or do you already have it in your plans, about how many casks you envision having on site?
I should know the exact number. Thousands.
Yeah.
Our plan is to have basically all our cask inventory, space for other people's casks if you're interested.
Always.
But we recognise cask storage is there's a shortage. So we want to have a far tighter control over our casks. I shared the horrific story, which I can now laugh at to an extent. But I mean, I think it was December 2014 or 15, where a forklift drove into one of our Port Ellen casks, and it's soul destroying and it's horrific, and it was a real drop everything you're doing, get into the boardroom, we need a meeting moment. So, and I'm not saying that won't happen under our own watch, but at least we'll only have ourselves to blame, whereas it was just the lack of control sometimes in the whisky industry is tough, because you're often at arm's length from things that you shouldn't be at arm's length from. The casks are so important that you want to be able to see them and touch them and know that they're being looked after.
And so just to fill that out for the listeners there, so you had a cask of Port Ellen that had been pulled for a bottling run that was at a bottling hall that a forklift ran through, and you lost the entirety of the cask. You weren't. You didn't jump in your car and start picking out shards.
So we didn't even hear about it till about 2 weeks after.
Oh.
So it'd been, I think, just left to flow away. So yes, I mean, moments like that they're the days where you need a sample at your desk to have a quick.
Oh my goodness! And did you receive that call? Did that go to Fred? Did it go to somebody else in the chain?
I think it went to our production team.
It worked its way along. You tell them.
Yeah. I think it may have taken a few days for it to reach us. But these things happen. And that's the thing. There's not much you can do, but it happens. And now I can say it with a smile on my face. I couldn't back then. But you've got to just suck it up and move on. And thankfully, you've got cask insurance and warehouse insurance,
right.
And you know that helps a little, but you also know the value of these casks, and in fact, never mind that, you know that particularly with the likes of Port Ellen, it can't, particularly a Port Ellen 35, 40-year-old, it can't be repeated again.
Well, and I think, you know, the part that, you know, I'm sure some savvy consumers think about, but you're also trying to tell a story with your releases as an independent bottler. And that would have had a part in a narrative that went even beyond. And the liquid is serious enough and the age is serious enough. But the position within a line or a release is vital as well. And to lose that part of the story can be difficult as well. Not as difficult as losing the physical cask.
No, it was a bad day. It was a bad day at Douglas Laing.
Bad day. There was 2 weeks coming. I want to quickly talk about an unsexy part of the business, and then we've got one question that we ask of everybody to end the interview.
Okay.
You, Joshua, and myself, before we hit our various record buttons, were talking about the logistics side of the industry, and you know, you get into the whiskey business and you think it's whiskey to the forefront and it's whiskey every day, and it really isn't. And so for you at Douglas Laing, what are you facing on that dry goods side of things? You know, when you come into the office, what are some of the things you're taking care of, boxes that you're checking?
Loads. And again,
Right.
I think that's the thing about smaller businesses, family businesses, independent bottlers. You wear many hats. It's something I always say to people in interviews in here, that you'll either love it or loathe it, because if you're someone that loves to roll their sleeves up and get involved and do lots of things and see the entire process, you'll love life at Douglas Laing. But if you're used to a big company where you just look after labels or you just look after casks, then this probably isn't the place for you. And by that I mean we have to get involved in everything, and the dry goods and packaging aspect is something I get very involved in, because it's so important. I believe consumers buy with their eye first. Mm-hmm. Even the greatest whiskey enthusiasts, they care about how it looks, whether it's the packaging or the spirit colour. They form an opinion pretty quickly. So we have all sorts of challenges, from labels peeling off tubes to corks breaking, to suppliers, particularly at the moment because of COVID, lengthening supply lines and lead times just generally doubling. It's amazing. Every day you're like, what are you going to be hit with? Because generally every day for about the last month to 2 months, there has been something. A printer for labels has had a COVID outbreak, or a bottling partner has had a COVID outbreak, or shipping cases haven't been delivered in on time, or quite a regular one for us is labels going down the bottling line and suddenly they discover a back label is bigger than it should be and it stops the line.
Oh no.
Just things like that.
Yeah.
And actually the other thing just now we're really finding difficult, and it makes lots of sense, but all these warehouses in Scotland are so old, they don't really allow for social distancing. So trying to get casks moved out, I don't know if you guys have found this, but we're just finding in a lot of the older warehouses, they're struggling to access casks because it's got to be done by hand, and they can't really send two guys in to manually handle it because they've got to be close together. So it's just, you sometimes feel you're in customer service because you're just dealing with a lot of problems at times. but then you see, which sounds terribly negative, because then you see the end result, and we love, like you guys have obviously just had, when you have that moment where a product comes together, and it might have been an absolute pain to get it there, but you see the finished thing and it's got the wax dipping and the labels are perfectly applied and the box looks great. You release it and consumers love it and it wins awards and you see it on social media. You're like, oh, we all did that, and
Yes.
it all came together beautifully. But the journey to that point can be painful at times.
100%. And sometimes I try to remember to look through the same eyes that got me and Joshua into the business, which is when that product is ready and we post it on social media or we make it available for sale, I try to look at what the consumers, the members of the nation, this community that's grown around us, I try to remember to look at it through their eyes and not through that never got picked up and that label got approved 3 different times for 3 different reasons and that was a headache.
There's a typo on it.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Yeah, we just had it, and I'll Joshua will decide whether to take this out in post or not. But that Balcones that we just released today, that it's actually now sold out in that hour. But on the label of it, once Joshua and I got the finished product and we held it, the distillery name is in grey, and we never, ever, ever, ever put the distillery name in grey. And somewhere between the label being approved and the label being printed, we signed off on the grey distillery name and never once noticed it until it was in our hand on the bottle, ready for sale.
Well, I'm not judging. We've had sugar spelt wrong. We had a provenance Glendacum instead of Glencadam.
So in getting out of here, it's a 2-parter, and we can go as depth as you want. It doesn't need to be a 2-second answer. And when you hear the question, you might gather that. We've talked about it through our conversation, independent bottling, the independent bottling business. First of all, what do you see as the future for independent bottlers? And then secondarily, what are you, and we touched on this as well, what are you most excited about as an independent bottler going forward?
Interesting. I think this next 6 months to a year will be really interesting for all of us in the independent bottling category, because it's always been this history of whisky lakes or whisky lochs and whisky droughts, and it is the big boys that determine that. I don't know. I don't get the impression right now that the state of the world is having a massive impact on the big boys. I think spirits are still doing quite well through this. That said, it feels like we might be coming into a bit of a whisky loch scenario again, and it's at that point it gets a bit more interesting for all us independent bottlers, because suddenly there's more interesting varied stock kicking about. I don't know, it's a difficult one to know what way it will go, because whisky's just been on this wonderful growth platform, and I'd love to see it continue because it's good for all of us. I just sense at some point that will start to level off, and it might mean some of us can pick up some more interesting stock. And you're right, you can tell when there's been a parcel of broker stock kicking about, because suddenly there's a lot of very similar bottlings of a similar age and style. So it would be nice to see a bit more variety, and some of the distillers loosen their stance on filling programs a bit.
Which actually, can I interject with a question? Because I'm curious your take on it, given that you are third generation. For me, one of the things that I love the most, and one of the things I talk about all the time over here in the US about independent bottlers, is that we have had our brand top, and then that distillery name. I'm seeing a rise of no-name parcels coming out, and we as a company don't really want to bottle that. And we have been working to find uses for that. What's your position on this rise of unnamed liquid? And do you think it flies in the face of what your grandfather set up and your father continued and you're continuing?
We're used to it. I mean, I think even back in my grandpa's day, a number of the distillers said, we'll access your filling programs, but you can't say it's from X distillery. So we've been used to it. I guess it's part of what also drove us to establish the regional malts. So we've got filling programs where we can't say what they are, and it's annoying because some of them are cracking distilleries that you would love to be able to say. In a way, it adds to the mystique. Like I don't know the Coca-Cola recipe, and I've no idea where I'd even begin. And I think sometimes I'm all for transparency, but I sometimes think the whiskey industry is asked to divulge too much.
Interesting.
That leaves very little room for mystique. So I'm not totally against it. And then I also think it's helped by groups like Malt Maniacs, where you can maybe plant a seed that actually, that might be Ardbeg. And then you let them chat about it. I think it also generates conversation. Equally, I can understand why people get frustrated by it because they want to know what they're drinking, and arguably they're perfectly entitled to know what they're drinking. Yeah. I see both sides. It sounds like a politician's answer, but I can see why distillers want to be protective of their spirit completely. But I also think it does add a bit of magic and mystery, which sometimes in life is nice, and we all need it.
Well, and I think for me, I could be okay with it for one reason, and I'm not okay with it for the other reason. I could be okay with it if they would say, look, we're running the stills, we're releasing spirit. You know, you're a customer and you're receiving spirit. And if that was the case, I'm okay with that. It's this rise of distilleries, physical factories becoming brands, and brands being protected. That's a little bit that rubs me the wrong way. Has Ardbeg earned the right to be its own brand? Sure. Has Bowmore earned that right? Sure. Has Macallan? Sure. You know, could we go on down the line? But then we're offered stock from distilleries that if we put the name across our label in neon pink, nobody would know what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And they're being protected. And I'm like, that's not going to work. That's frustrating to me. I want to introduce our nation members, our consumers, to these wonderful distilleries. And I feel like I'm not getting a chance to do that. And that's frustrating.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I would totally agree with that, yes.
Another aspect of what you were just saying a moment ago is it's so interesting that the way you were talking about, you know, forward-looking plans for Douglas Laing are really contingent on other companies' plans. And I think that sometimes we miss that in independent bottling circles as well, where we're doing everything we can to protect ourselves against the decisions that we're not privy to. But in terms of that rise of the Whiskey Loch again, we're not privy to those conversations. We don't get to be responsible for those decisions, but they are going to impact us either for good or for bad.
And I think it is part of the reason of what's driven us to take on Strathearn and to be building Clutha, because it is, we use the line a lot, we want to be masters of our own destiny. 100%. And it is, sometimes you get a bit twitchy and itchy, being at the mercy of others. That said, I think sensible distillers will always see the the positives that independent bottlers bring, both from a commercial perspective, but a credibility and PR aspect. We do bring a lot of good stuff to them as well.
Absolutely. We had been relying on anecdotal evidence, but we ran some marketing and found out that 70% of our members who learn about a distillery through Single Cask Nation will go and buy the distiller's bottle in a shop. Like how key is that?
Yeah.
And there's that trust and there's that responsibility.
Yep.
It's so important. So obviously I could keep talking to you. You need to go home. You've got children. What are you most excited about going forward?
It's terrible to say this. I'm very excited about our bottling facility.
Right.
Mainly because the line went in today. I mean, it's not up and running, but the line arrived. So I think because it's hot off the press and I've just seen it for the first time, and because of the number of problems we have having our bottlings done by others, that's exciting. And but it's not so romantic. So I should give you a romantic one.
I love the honesty. No, we're here for the honesty.
Well, I'm excited for next year. I'm hoping across the board 2021 is a better year. I think this year sucked. There's not been many positives in 2020. It's been a tough one for everyone. And I am optimistic for 2021. And from a Douglas Laing Whisky perspective, I think 2021 will see us really get our act together with Strathearn and ramp up production there and hopefully be able to open the door to some visitors. We will get Clutha up and running, and I've just seen the selection of single casks that we'll be releasing through Q1 of next year, and it's nice and it's varied and there's some interesting ones. We've got exciting plans for the regional malts next year as well. So I'm buoyed by the fact that 2021 can only be a better year, and certainly it's a big year for us here and across the board to get things right and get things moving and have some good positive outcomes. I'd love to get back out to the States. I've not been in the US since about 2014.
Okay.
And we've got great partners out there who we've only ever met over Zoom and Teams calls. So I'd love to get out to the States again next year. That would be nice. But right now I can't get down to London, let alone America. So I'm not holding my breath.
You can't get from one side of Glasgow to the other.
No. God forbid you should try and go to a bar in Glasgow at the moment. We're in a state of prohibition. So
gosh, it's obviously a tough time, but your plans for the future sound absolutely fantastic.
It is. Next year's a big one for us. We've got it will be tough. I mean, it's not going to be an easy gig at all, and there are always challenges, but it should be an exciting one.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure spending time with Cara. And as we said there, to the future. We raise a glass to the future where we will actually get to sit in person and meet Chris, who got mentioned plenty of times in that interview. Perhaps meet Fred, who I've seen, I've never met, never been introduced to.
Same.
And so, it'll be good. It'll be good to get over, see the distillery, see the bottling hall, have a chance to taste some casks, maybe. Just chat. Just have a jolly good time in Glasgow.
You know, Yoni Miller, our in-house cigar czar, I think it was Yoni, had told me that Douglas Laing, either last year, maybe the year before, did something very cool. So you know how they have Big Pete, which gets mentioned in the podcast a few times, or in the interview a few times. And every year they do a Big Pete Christmas edition, which is usually cask strength and all that. But they did a Big Pete Purim edition. which is very cool. So for those of you that don't know, Purim is a Jewish holiday that usually involves a fair amount of drinking. It is very much a drinking holiday. And I just love that Douglas Laing came out with something that was for us.
That's a very nice thing. So there you go. That was wonderful. So thank you to even the team at the Whisky Show with the Whisky Exchange. Without them, I wouldn't have been prodded to reach out to Cara. We would have just continued to be ships that passed in the night.
Indeed.
And so that was very good.
Yep.
Lovely.
Yeah. Yep.
So what's next for us, Joshua?
Well,
where are we taking this?
We have got a few things going on. We have news that we need to report. We have some listener emails and messages that we definitely want to talk about. And so let's do it in that order. Let's go for the news. And then, and we have some new feedback on our Apple iTunes thing. Someone posted a comment there, so I want to read that as well.
Wonderful.
Let's
wake up the paper boy.
Wake him up.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it. Me and that Playboy in trouble again.
First bit of news from me
Right.
is our second retail release for UK, Europe, rest of the world is moving on a pace. It is in bottles. It does have labels. And because 2020 is not ready to be done being a nuisance just yet, we've got a little bit of a new COVID slowdown in Scotland at our bottling hall with the labelling. And so everything is in place. We just need the team to be able to come together to get those labels attached. But we're very excited. We have posted the blog update, which is something we've traditionally done for the US retail releases. But now we're starting to do that for the UK, Europe, rest of the world releases as well. So people who are interested in the nation can go along. I've got it up on singlecasknation.com. If you click the blog down on the left side, you'll be able to find it. You were also putting it on singlecasknation.co.uk?
Correct. Right. So that's a newer website for us that we're still building. But for those of you who are living outside of the U.S., we're trying to put more content up on singlecasknation.co.uk. And we'll get that blog post up there as well, which includes tasting notes and cask details and all that stuff.
Well, and the other thing we have been saying to people is no matter where you are in the world, if you have interest in Single Cask Nation, please become a member at singlecasknation.com. You will receive the State of the Single Cask Nation email every month where we're trying to put everything we're up to globally in one spot and delivered to your inbox. Yes. Now, you will also see news about the US releases, but you will absolutely receive the State of the Single Cask Nation email, and that is important.
Correct.
So to clarify here, on the releases here that we have, UK, Europe, rest of the world, we have the Clynlish 9-year-old, which was second fill bourbon hogshead. We have Aberfeldy 28-year-old, refill bourbon hogshead. Glenelgin 10-year-old, second fill bourbon hogshead, which is, you and I tasted it, completely out of left field. That's a very, very different Glenelgin.
Because it tastes as if that previous hogshead had held something peaty before. There's something smoky going on in there, and it's lovely.
You don't see a smoky Glenelgin very often.
No, you don't.
Then we also have Imperial 24-year-old, second fill bourbon barrel. An Old Grain Invergordon 45-year-old in a first fill bourbon barrel. That's exciting. An active cask on an Old Grain. And then we are releasing 300 bottles of our undisclosed Kentucky Straight Bourbon 24-year-old. That will be 300 bottles available for UK, Europe, rest of the world.
Correct.
That's a big deal. This is our first ever global release.
That's true, right? Yeah, bottled in 70 cl or 700 ml for countries outside of the U.S., and then in 750 ml for us for South Africa, because some of this will go to South Africa, which we're very excited about. And we're hoping to get a little bit of it into Alberta, up into Canada as well. So yeah, that is our first global release. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It is. It's crazy. Yeah, this pre-fire Kentucky bourbon that has got people quite excited. Mm-hmm. With that said, Joshua, I will throw the floor over to you for the second news item.
Well, my news bit isn't too far off from what we just mentioned. While we're releasing 300 bottles of our 24-year-old Kentucky bourbon, pre-fire, as we've been saying, for the rest of the world, we have 1,200 bottles bottled for the U.S., and that is going to go on sale online on our website on November 10th at 12 noon. This will not be a lottery situation. We know that in the past we've said if it's a bourbon, if it's a rye, we're going to put it up on lottery. But that was because it was always single cask. This is not a single cask, obviously. We have 1,200 bottles worth of the liquid. So we have much more liquid to go around. So what we'll do is we'll limit it to 2 per person. And the bottles will be $295 a piece. And, of course, as always, $10 flat rate shipping. So you can get 2 bottles and it'll still cost you just the $10 to ship.
And to be crystal clear,
All right.
the 1,200 bottles coming to the United States can only reside within the United States. This is why we've gone out and released these 300 bottles outside of the United States, is we wanted fans of Single Cask Nation and bourbon fans dotted around the world to have access to this. But the 1,200 that will be sold online November 10 at noon with a 2 max per person will only remain within the United States, can only be shipped within the United States. We can say it is the identical liquid.
Yes.
So
Same
don't
exact.
feel like you have to go out and find a 70 CL if you have access to the 75. Don't think you have to go get access to the 75 CL if you only have access to the 70 CL. It's the same liquid. It's all from the same batch.
Yeah.
I think the nation is going to respond very positively to this after, and I'm throwing this in for a key reason here. We released the Balcones Double Cask Nation 4-year-old on October 28.
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah, sure. Checks out.
Something like that.
We released it
And-
in a date in late October.
And what was interesting is, as you alluded to earlier, Joshua, with the UK clocks going back the week before, our calendars got out of sync for things we'd planned. And we interviewed Cara during the sale of the Balcones.
That's right.
And normally we blank out that time, and we had it blanked out, except for the clock change. And we like to keep an eye on emails and keep an eye on sales and keep an eye that everything's just running smoothly. And during the interview, I received a text message from a good friend and a good supporter, Cameron Rifle, in Idaho.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, "Did it really sell out?" And I had no idea because I wasn't watching anything, which always makes me think, "Oh no, have we hit a road bump here? Do I have to check something here?" And I very quickly looked over at the website while you were speaking to Cara. Cara was speaking to us. I had a quick look at the website, and we really sold out 450 bottles of that Balcones in 49 minutes.
Wow.
It was tremendous support from the nation, absolutely tremendous, and has me so excited to release the 24-year-old pre-fire bourbon to them as well. I'm really excited to see what they do with this release. We will be crystal clear for the November 10 launch that it's a pre-sale.
Yes, thank you.
And we have moved away from pre-sales because they get a little untidy. But, and I'm okay saying this out loud on the podcast, this is the biggest project you and I have ever undertaken.
Period.
Right?
Yep.
It's the number of bottles. It's the global nature of it. It's the price of those bottles. And as we said earlier this year, we are willing to take bigger chances with this company because we have the support of the nation behind us. And so we're doing the pre-sale on this so that we know the numbers. We know the sales. We know the income. I'm being very transparent here. We know the full situation surrounding this project before we bring it into the country. This is hugely important. And having the nation have our backs on this is hugely important, hugely so. And so I don't want people to... We're always cautious. We never want to present a bait and switch. So when we make this available November 10, for everybody who purchases, we're going to take those email addresses, we're going to dedicate their own folder to them, and we are going to give you at least weekly updates on the progress of this. Because it's not simply buy, wait a week, and we start shipping. We're also going to have to ship 1,200 bottles. That's a process. We'll be doing our best there as well. So there will be updates that come with this, so you always know where you stand. But it is a pre-sale. And we're hoping that clear communication will benefit you, and you purchasing will benefit us, and together we will all benefit the nation.
I think it's important to point out that communication is very much a two-way street, though. And so if we're putting information out, it needs to be read. Right? What's that? TL semicolon DR, too long didn't read? That's not going to work here, right? It will just cause frustration. If everybody reads the information up front, they will know the state of everything in play, and then we will over-communicate, like you had said. And it's just a matter of we will communicate, but you need to digest that information.
Yeah. And we will put out photos. We will put out videos. Those will go direct to the inboxes of purchasers. The purchasers will get the first look at each step of this progress. We will, of course, keep our Facebook group involved. Our Facebook group is blowing up anyway with this release, with the announcement of this release. And so, yes, there will be lots of nice things to look at and keep everybody on the same page. And with that said, do you have another news item? You have a cat with a lampshade on its head on your lap.
Yeah, while you were enjoying Shabbat and Lyle Lovett and Chris Isaac, I was taking my cat to the vet because he got bit by something, and now he has an upside down lampshade on his head because cats are cats.
He looks happy with that pet right now, though.
Yeah,
some nice pro-level petting going on there.
I don't think I have any other news. Am I supposed to have other news?
You might not have any more news to share. I'm going to make a little tease here, and then we're going to get out of the news segment.
Okay.
For those of you in the United States who are not hearing us talking about retail release number 7, the wheels are turning behind the scenes.
Yes, they are.
We do have selections. We do have bottling. We do have some labeling. It is a real thing that will happen in the future. and we will have more information. It'll be on the website, it'll be in the State of the Nation address, it'll be on the podcast, it'll be on the Facebook group. We will spread the news once it is ready to be spread.
Yeah, unfortunately, 2020 sucks, COVID sucks, everything sucks, and everything's ruined, Jason.
However, as any business person will tell you, it's these challenges that make us stronger, Joshua. And we will come out of this better for the experience. You buying that?
Moving
Go on. Go on. Give it a buy. Come on. Push your chips in.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I'll lose everything on that.
So let's get to some emails. You talked about COVID there. I know we've got a really tremendous COVID-related message.
We received one of the nicest emails that we've received in a good while. And that's saying something, right? Because think of the lovely message that we got from Travis Williams recently, right? Think about some of the lovely messages that we've gotten. There's some people down in Brazil who've sent us some messages, and people in Sweden who have sent us emails. You know, people are connecting with our podcast, and it means a lot. And
it does.
And this email, I don't know. I really enjoyed it, and I want to read it for everybody. And so this is from Dr. Matt Bishop. And the subject reads, "Greetings and thanks for all the good times, J, and J." And now it goes on with the content of the email. It says, "Hi, Jason, Joshua, and Jess. Rearrange in preference as suits the reader." Now, Jason, you know my preference is that it's Joshua, Jason, and Jess, but you may read it differently. But
whatever makes you happiest, Joshua.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Bishop says, "I'm writing to express the gratitudes, platitudes, attitudes, and altitudes." You know, he's a solid listener here. "That I have for your presence on the airwaves during difficult times of the COVID pandemic. The comfort and security I have received during 2020 whilst listening to your shows are very much appreciated and are second to none in the vast arena of podcasts. As a key worker working on novel cancer therapies, I have commuted to Edinburgh throughout all variations of the national and regional lockdowns and have listened to what may have been days or weeks in total of your broadcasts."
Just think, all that medical knowledge that he once had has been not entirely pushed out, but it's been squeezed by all of the nonsense we put into the podcast. So my sincere apologies for squeezing that medical knowledge.
Every time I learn something new, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain.
Well, I just say you're welcome, but that's me. So he goes on. He says, "I've watched the world pass by through my car windows, from deserted streets to bewildered people venturing out, to finally masked masses trudging soulless on their way to secure the last pack of toilet roll. Inside my car, I am wrapped in tall tales, whiskey stories, family anecdotes, distillers' dreams, and all tied up with strings of laughter and good friendships. Your short, tight 30s and dialogues that seem to hold no boundary in time have kept the world in its place for me. I know, right? I know I'm only one of many listeners, but it feels like you are talking just to me as I drive the long road. I laugh till I cry, and I cry till I laugh, and on the way there's no virus, no panic, no government ineptitude, nothing but fun stories of high spirits and whiskey spirits. Thank you for your time and energy in filling my world so wonderfully with your words and thoughts. I must apologize at this point, though, as I've yet to buy a single bottle of your Single Cask Nation whiskey. If it's anywhere near as fantastic as your pad cost, I will surely be in for a treat beyond compare. Maybe soon? ? And then finally he says, with regards and the sincerest of best wishes from here in central Scotland, thank you, Chin Chin, 2 chins, Matt.
2 chins.
2 chins. Oh man,
That's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. That's I get verklempt during messages like that.
Yes.
He said, clearing his throat on the podcast. And, dusty in here.
Yeah, it's I don't take compliments easy, but I will say, Dr. Bishop, Matt, I'm glad that we could help in any way, shape, or form. We can help your life be just a little bit easier, a little less insufferable. Yeah.
A little less out of control. It's the fact that we keep the world in place, for that one moment, like that one thing. And I think that's, I was going to ask you this week, but we definitely don't have time for it. I'll just mention it very briefly in passing. You've said a few times that the most fun you're having in the industry right now is this podcast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the recording of it, the interviews, the chatting, the post-production. And I think it speaks to the point that Dr. Matt was making there. It was Matt?
Yeah, Matt.
I just think of Dr. Matt and I think Lurin.
I know, right? Dr. Matt Lurin.
I suddenly thought I'd subbed in the wrong doctor. And so as Dr. Matt is saying there, we've joked for years about you putting a pin in it. And I feel like in the larger life, this podcast has put a pin of placement, of belonging, of returning to, that I think that might be where you're drawing such enjoyment.
That's it. It's
in production.
Right. Yeah. It's between the conversations and just editing, the rest of the world goes away and things just kind of feel semi-normal.
Did you ever get that feeling when you're working on post and you're thinking, well, it's been 2 weeks since I did this. That's 2 weeks that have passed in the blinking of an eye. But it's 2 weeks. You can feel grounded in the knowledge that, well, for this moment, I know how time has passed. And then we go back to time meaning nothing again for another 2 weeks.
100%, even to the point where, and editing takes a long time. And Heidi had said, you guys should think about hiring someone to edit your podcasts. And I see what she's saying because, yes, it takes a long time. I would, in a normal world, boy, would I love for that time to be freed up. But I'm clinging to this. I need it. I really do.
Yeah. It's funny actually. In listening to Dr. Matt there, he actually made me think of being with Vadim and David and their group last Thursday. Mm-hmm. And
Thursday.
And there was Qua and John Debney, Farina. Am I remembering that name correctly?
So. Yeah.
And a host of people who are our podcast listeners, and we were tasting the stuff that we were sampling with them, and then they were pulling from their shelves and we were pulling from our shelves. And we just hung out for a good long time. And ultimately when they said, Jason and Joshua, this has been great, but we cannot do this all night. You both have to leave. It was kind of like, oh, yes, thank you for hosting us for 5 hours. It has been a genuine pleasure, and I only joke about them showing us the door. It was 2 o'clock our East Coast time by the time we had to draw that to our close.
2:30 somewhere around there. Yeah.
But what a blast! But again, it was a sense of place, a sense of being, a sense of belonging, and feeling once again. Being amongst people, like missing going to the pub, missing going to restaurants, missing standing in a room with a group of people, drinking and telling stories. And I think the kindest compliment we got last Thursday at that tasting was that for the attendees, it felt like they were participating in a live podcast that was just for them. Nothing. We weren't recording anything on our end. You and I were our usual selves with our back and forth and occasionally taking the piss and then being very loving and caring in our language for one another. And it's just how we move and how we operate. And I think they felt like they were in a moment that was familiar during a time that is increasingly unfamiliar. Yeah. So, we have a ton of fun with this. It's a silly podcast, and honestly, it does. It makes me emotional when people share what it means to them.
Yes, I will. I have to admit something, and I don't know if this happens to you at all, but it sure as hell happens to me. Anytime someone signs off with, Dr. whatever, instantly in my head, I've got, Doctor, give me the news. I got a bad case of loving you. Scoopy doopy doopy doopy.
I will tell you this. Yeah. So my wife is a PhD. My wife is a doctor. Right. And I sing that song to her all the time. All the time.
All right. Look at that.
Especially if she comes back from the mailbox and there's any form of newsletter or newspaper in it, I always sing that song to her.
Doctor, give me the news. It's so perfect. Oh, very
good. We also received a message from somebody that we quoted on a recent episode of One Nation Under Whisky. And so, Joshua, this came in via Facebook, and so you're the man with the Facebook machine.
Yeah.
I will leave this in your capable hands.
The initial message that we brought up on that previous episode was from Kurt Suter, who basically said, your most recent extra episode where you talked about sexism in whiskey, really loved the conversation. Have you considered maybe dropping the dick jokes? And we had thought about that in passing, but it really gave us pause. And so we said, you know what, let's think about how we would do that. And it got us nervous that if someone is saying that, especially a man is saying that, how many women out there are potentially saying that in their heads and not reaching out? And so we said, okay, yeah, we'll think about doing that. And so Kurt, after having heard that, wrote to me directly, and he says, and I have to apologize, I've got to get really close to my laptop here because my old man eyes don't see as they used to see. So this is from Kurt Suter. Should I read the whole thing in Old Man? No, I shouldn't.
No.
Thanks to you and Jason fucking Sinner.
Oh, good Lord.
So Kurt says, Joshua, thanks to you and Jason for considering my suggestion for the podcast. When you read it aloud, I certainly came across as holier than thou, and that was not my intent at all. I also mistakenly referenced dick jokes, and really it was usually just double entendres during banter before interviews. Those little inside jokes always struck me as harmless and sounded a lot like my banter with my male coworkers. When I listened to the Sexism in Whiskey episode, it kind of made me think that maybe it wasn't up to me to decide what was and what wasn't a harmless comment. That's all I was trying to communicate. And I think he communicated that perfectly. And he goes on, he says, anyway, I just wanted to apologize for coming across as some kind of moral authority. I was just trying to thank you both for starting the conversation and look upon this as an opportunity for all of us to improve. I enjoy the podcast, and the things I've learned from it have helped me enjoy whiskey more. And for that, I'm grateful. Cheers, Kurt. And so I said, he and I had a bit of a back and forth after that. And I said to him, first and foremost, I never once thought he was coming off as holier than thou. If anything,
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
I took it as him also taking pause and saying, maybe you should reconsider this. Maybe you should consider your entire audience. Like I get that. It wasn't holier than thou. It was like we all as people need to just check ourselves on occasion.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted Kurt to have a chance to have his voice heard on this episode. Because if he, in listening back to it, thought it sounded holier than thou, there might be other listeners who heard it and thought the same thing, whether you and I did or not, and we certainly did not. And so I just wanted to give him the floor again to be able to say, yeah, we're all in this together, right? We're asking questions and we're saying, could we be better here? And I think that's a very real ongoing conversation for us. And there's definitely an aspect to it you and I discuss where internally with your group of friends, whether they be male or female, you know, you have your own set of internal jokes and your own internal sets of humor. What does it look like when you try to extend that? And can you then ultimately wade into the wrong waters, say the wrong thing in the wrong way at the wrong time to the wrong person? Like it's about us being, and we've said this previously, it's about being inclusive, not exclusive. And so it was telling in Kurt's point there, where he said, you know, those double entendres at the beginning of the podcast that sound like the same types of double entendres he might have with his male colleagues, right? That use of the term male again, right? There's a group of people we have those jokes with, but there's a group of people we don't have those jokes with. And maybe instead of being exclusionary, we need to be careful in how we're being inclusionary. So that's 100%. It's always worth pivoting back to. It's always worth, you know, none of us are done having this conversation. We haven't solved anything yet. We're still working and still trying to, as we said in the introduction of today's episode, we're still trying to #be best, and we will continue to try. Perhaps one day becoming #woke.
Oh gosh.
I just say that to see your face. That makes me happy.
Yeah, sorry.
Before we get out of here, and I'm a little cognizant of time here, you teased me earlier by saying we had some more feedback on the podcast page. We have some Apple feedback.
Oh, when you said tease, I thought when I said you had a fat ass and stinky breath, I thought that's what you meant. Okay, so you're talking.
Seems a little harsh.
You're talking about something else.
I've been doing a lot of sitting, though. I'll tell you that. I'm not doing nearly as much standing. I just didn't think you could see it from that angle.
Jason, this camera sees all. It's hard to hide it. I do want to read this comment, which showed up on the Apple Podcasts thing, but I want to let everybody know in case they want to reach out to us, like the good Dr. Matt did. Or Kurt, Kurt Facebook message. But if anybody wants to reach out to us, they can email us questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com, or they could tweet at us, and we are @OneNationWhiskey. They could Instagram at us @OneNationUnderWhiskey, and then finally go to Facebook. If you're on the Facebooks, go to the search bar, look for One Nation Under Whiskey, and you will find us there. And whiskey, does whiskey have an E, Jason?
Never, Joshua. Never.
Yeah.
I'll also, as we're going global and trying to present more global offerings, if you have any question about our whiskey at any time, drop an email to info@singlecasknation.com. No matter where you are in the world, that will get in front of the right eyes, and we will answer your question one way or the other, assuming we know the answer to it.
Well, we could always make up something, right?
When did you last check the P.O. box?
So I'm glad you brought that up. I checked the P.O. box on Saturday, and I'm very sad to report that we have yet to receive another piece of mail. And so I want our listeners to step up to the plate like the good Paul Marco did, and maybe send us a postcard, send us a letter, and you can do so by sending it to P.O. Box 335, Guilford, Connecticut, Guilford, Connecticut, 06437. You could put it to the attention of Single Cask Nation, J&J Spirits, One Nation Under Whiskey, Two Jamokes, whatever you want to do.
Two Jamokes and a poke. Okay, give me this. I don't know if this is 1 star or 5 star or anywhere in between, but let's hear this, Joshua. I've girded myself for these words.
So this is a 5-star rating, and the title just says extra extra. And the person who posted it, their handle, I guess you would call it, is, and it's all one word, but why the male models? I don't get that, but I like that a lot. But why the male models? And it just says, amazing episode. Really great points made about trusting those who are serving and selling you a product. Signed up for the newsletter Joshua had mentioned and bought the book Jason had mentioned. Looking forward to learning more. This was in response to the episode where we highlighted the bar that was filling premium bottles with less than premium liquid, and in some cases mixing different drinks to create other drink.
Highly questionable. Yeah, our dear friends V reached out to us as well and said it was one of his favorite episodes. That, the content and then just the way we discussed it. And then when we record our next extra episode, actually have some information that was posted to our One Nation Under Whiskey page that I will include in the extra episode.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
That's great. Thank you to But Why the Male Models? Am I remembering that correctly?
But why the male models? And it's
Thanks.
MALE, not MAIL, just to be.
I was curious. Yeah, thanks to them for taking the time to write a review. That's always very much appreciated. Helps other people find us. Makes a recommendation that we're worth listening to. For all of those kind people who send in their emails saying how much they enjoy us, please tell your friends. Please get them to waste multiple hours of their lives listening to our nonsense as well. That would be much appreciated. Yeah, keep spreading the news.
Keep spreading the news.
That's it. I'm leaving today.
I'm leaving right now. The podcast is over, Jason. We have to
It's
end it.
over.
Yeah.
We're all leaving.
Yeah.
Well, of course. Sincere thanks to Cara Laing for her time.
100%. Yes.
Thanks to Dr. Matt for his email, Kurt for his conversation, Vadim and David for hosting us as last week that we mentioned, to But Why the Male Models for lovely feedback. Anyone I'm missing?
Forgot to thank the listeners. You forgot to thank me.
Those were coming. Those
okay.
are the exit thanks. I was just seeing if I'd missed anybody from the episode.
No, you did not. You covered all the bases. You did a wonderful job.
Well, I will say thank you to our wonderful in-house graphic designer, Mo, who's responsible for the bourbon label. And it has been turning heads of those who have seen it and really, in its own way, setting eyeballs on fire.
Ouch.
In its own way. And of course, Joshua, thank you to you for all of your hard work in post. And thank you to our dear listeners for spending their time with us as we all fumble through the latest lockdowns, non-lockdown situations that are all COVID related.
On that lovely note by you, I say 2 chins.
Chin chin. I am officially leaving this podcast today.
like when Walk Like an Egyptian came out, do you think people in Egypt were pissed off? Because Egyptians clearly do not walk. I mean, as far as I know, Egyptians do not walk like the Bengals suggest they walk.
But my guess is the Egyptian love of the Bangles superseded their being upset at the song. And so I just think they were so genuine. And I just think Egyptians saw that and saw that it was just a harmless song.
You know, I remember hearing the singer, what was her name? Lisa something, I want to say.
No idea. You could say, Jason, for $1 million, what was the name of the lead singer of the Bangles? And I would not be able to give you one letter.
Not one?
Not one letter. Like I would go Wheel of Fortune style.
Yeah.
I would just start naming vowels and then common consonants.
Because at least with the vowels, you can, you have a 1 in 5 chance you're going to get it.
I would hope. Yeah. Well, I would probably pick sometimes Y. That would be my choice.
Oh, that's the wild card. See what I did there?
Sometimes Y.
So what I was going to say is I heard her say that they're big in Egypt.
Big in Egypt, yeah. Why would the Bangles not be big in Egypt? They're lovely.